Tony Long, welcome to H Hour.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I say my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you for giving me the time. I know that, especially at the moment recently, been busy with news, media, and things like that. So I appreciate it. I really do. Now, I'd love to discuss. Today we're going to get into. I'd like to get your experience and knowledge and understanding of like current state of affairs with regards to policing, and in particular armed policing. Obviously, we had the recent
Martin Blake,
the
murder trial,
Chris
Cabba,
and you've obviously got extensive experience in that and extensive experience with armed police in general. For being an instructor, for 25 years?
I was an instructor for 25 years. I did my instructor's course in the spring of 1983.
Okay.
And when I left the Special Patrol Group and joined the unit, and I stayed there pretty much to the end of my career. So.
Mm-hmm. But when we connected a couple of weeks back, it was actually a reconnection because you reminded me that we'd actually spoken previously on the back of a previous guest that I had on.
That must have been, it was probably towards the tail end of COVID, I think. I remember.
I think you're right, yeah. So
yeah, you're talking about Mr. Cohn.
Mr. Cohn, Eddie Cohn. All right, so when did I interview him? Yeah, it would have been 2020, I reckon, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, I interviewed him, released that episode, and then lots of people got in touch. Upset with Mr. Cohn. Upset with me at times. Right. What's the issue, what he said?
Right, so it's interesting because I'd heard about Mr. Cohn by a totally different source. I've got a mate of mine that's been on the circuit for like 20 odd years, ex-bootneck, and he's big into his Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And he says to me, have you heard about this bloke Cohn? And I went, no. And like a lot of ex-servicemen, he goes, well, you must know him. He's ex-Met. And you go, like, mate, there's 30,000 blokes in the Met. There's only about 8,000 in the Corps. We don't all know each other, So he told me about this, but he said, oh, mate, he's claiming he was an undercover dude and he was in SO19 and all the rest of it. And then by pure coincidence, someone drew my attention to your podcast, and sure enough, there is Mr. Cohn. So, and he'd been on some other ones as well. You weren't the only person he'd spoken to. And so I sat down with a notepad because I'm a bit sad and I'm also quite forgetful. And I started writing down dates and things like this. And I started making a few inquiries. And while the Met is 30,000 strong, it's still compartmentalised quite small, so if somebody was on his division, there's a good chance that they may have ended up in my old unit in SO19 and stuff. So I started asking about and listening to the podcasts. You could have just driven a bus through it because he couldn't have done the things that he said that he did. And then I was getting feedback that actually his length of service wasn't right, that he'd only joined the Met on such and such a date, and he'd gone through Hendon, but he was claiming that he'd been in the police like for 3 or 4 years before that. Well, and that he'd been in Essex. And when I checked out, he hadn't been a regular police officer in Essex. He'd been a special, so like TA, really. And so that's why when he joined the Met with 3 years as a special, he had to be trained as a regular copper and go through basic training. And he said he'd been a driver on he'd been on the flying squad, he'd been in SO13. And just if you know anything about policing, you'll know that would be a hugely unusual career path to have taken.
Which is the unusual part about it? Sorry.
Well, all of it. None of it really matched up. And it transpired that he'd never actually left his initial borough. He'd been posted to a borough or a police station in East London, and he'd remained there for about 10 years service. He went protracted sick, and while he was protracted sick, he was seen on Sky Sports in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu competition. And so he was investigated for that. It all got awfully complicated. But long story short, I think he only did about 12 years, and he was claiming to have done 20 odd years. But he was also saying things like he'd been deployed overseas with SO13. Well, SO13 is the anti-terrorist squad. They're detectives. They investigate terrorist attacks. And yes, they could well have gone abroad, but he was saying, I lost good friends and I felt guilty because, if I'd have been there, their deaths wouldn't have happened. Well, you're like, no one's died in the Metropolitan Police overseas since Cyprus in the 1950s.
Yeah, he never said anything on the podcast.
No, but he did on other podcasts, and it was just, none of it added up. And then he was saying, that he'd done CQB and all this sort. And it turned out he'd never even been a shot. He'd never even done a basic firearms course. He'd spent most of his time, well, all of his time at this one police station in East London. And at one bit I remember him saying, yeah, he said when he'd come back from all these overseas missions, I wasn't the sort of bloke that could sit behind a desk, so I left. And you clearly were the sort of bloke that could sit behind a desk because you did it for 5 years when you were on light duties.
Yeah, he definitely never mentioned that. I went to see him after that. I went to see him when all that stuff started coming out, yeah, because it's not the first time something like this has happened to me. So, I suppose the military would refer to that as he's someone who's in the police, but he's bloating about his career. Right?
Well, yeah. I'd take it a little bit past bloating. I mean, it was just ludicrous.
I went up to see him about it, and we had a conversation. And to be honest, the way he explained it to me was quite compelling.
He's by all accounts, I've never met him. I have spoken to him, but did I speak to him or did I text him? No, I texted him, and he responded initially, and then he stopped when I put it on the line what I knew. He stopped doing it, but I think the sad thing is that when he was talking about his own experiences of street duty policing and officer safety training and all that sort of stuff, he had some very good viewpoints, and it's obviously drawn a lot from his jiu-jitsu, and apparently he was quite handy on the street. Well, he would be, wouldn't you? If you've got someone that's with you that's handy at jiu-jitsu, they're a good person to have on side. And I've spoken to some boats that go, he was a pretty good little copper. He was all right. But I don't think anybody understands it. I mean, when you see these people turning up, with medals that, they couldn't have owned, or I just don't know what goes through their mind, really. It's just that, what really amazes me as well is that the military even more so, because, it's much smaller. I mean, not the military as a whole. Well, actually, yeah, the military as a whole, but, on a regimental basis or on a unit basis, and I know that if you speak to somebody about someone, they might not know them, but they will know, there'll be a connection. And I don't know whether it's because the Met is so large that Cone thought, well, I can say what I want and people won't know, but it really isn't that big, on the grand scale.
Yeah, the way he explained it to me, so, I mean, I don't know neither here nor there, what he did and didn't do, but there's definitely no smoke without fire, and sometimes if enough people come out and say something, it can be true. That the accusations can be true, or equally they cannot. But the way he explained it to me when I went there, I was pretty pissed off. And this is, I'm thinking back a few years now, but it was basically a combination. To me, I remember thinking this is a combination of, okay, there's stuff that he says he's done, and it's not easy to prove that he did it because of redactions and some elements of I don't want to say secrecy. He didn't use the word secret, but there's some elements of information being not openly accessible to prove things that he had been part of or not. But I did afterwards think, I thought it sounded to me like an equivalent of an individual in the military who, let's say, got attached to a special unit for a time, be that short or long term, however you find that, weeks or months, years in some cases. Yeah. And then let's say it's the SAS, and that person coming away and saying they were part of the SAS.
Yeah, I mean, I've come across people that have said that.
You know what I mean? But that's how it sounded to me.
Yeah, I get where you come by that, but when you know the structure of the Met in particular, I mean, if you said to me, we used to be, or he'd claimed to have been Devon and Cornwall Police, I probably wouldn't have known. But in the Met, so for instance, he claimed to have been on the flying squad. Well, the flying squad's tiny.
Did he? He never said that on mine.
I'm not sure.
That's a bold claim.
Well, the thing is, he said no. It's like you said. He said he was seconded to the flying squad. Well, there's only one form of person that's seconded to the flying squad, and that's advanced drivers. And actually, the detectives, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but certainly for most of my service, detectives would come from another CID organisation or a borough CID office, like a divisional local police station CID office. And because they've proved their worth and they were a good, what we used to call thief taker, they get approached and asked if they wanted to go on the flying squad, and the vast majority would go absolutely, because it was considered, the apex of your career. And they'd go on in that flying squad office, and there was about 4 dotted around London. There was one at Tower Bridge, one at Barnes, one in North London, one in East London. But you would do something like a 3 or 4, possibly 5-year rotation through that. And so all the detectives, although they were the key players, because they're the ones that are investigating armed robberies and the like, although they would rotate through it, there would be advanced drivers who were uniformed coppers who were seconded on a sort of long-term basis to the flying squad to drive them, so that when they were doing a robbery operation, all the high-performance cars, which are like Ford Consuls or Granadas or whatever, they would all be driven by advanced drivers, and they would probably be there as long as they wanted, really, as long as they kept their nose clean, and but he was not an advanced driver.
See, I have vague recollections of him saying that.
He just wouldn't have gone. And the other thing is, they're so small, each individual CID office.
How do you know he wasn't an advanced driver?
Because I know he wasn't. Because I know he was only ever just a divisional driver. He only ever did a sort of 2-week basic course to drive Panda cars.
Is the advanced driver a national course? Is it?
It is a national course, but you don't do it nationally. So there'll be regional places. But Hendon, the Met being so big, every advanced driver in the Met would have gone through Hendon, and he didn't go through that. And so, and the other thing is that these flying squad offices are small, 30 odd guys per office. Everybody knows everybody else. If you're in the flying squad, you get the tie. You're a member for life, if you like, in terms of the sort of club membership. And so, if you just went to them and said, "You ever heard of a bloke called Eddie Cohn?" Nah, no one's ever heard of him, and that's because he didn't do any of that.
Frustrating.
It is frustrating.
So annoying.
It's frustrating, but it's like you mentioned earlier. You'll get guys that do a secondment to let's say to 2-2, and they think that because 2-2 is so secret, they can say things like that, and no one will be able to prove or disprove it. But actually, it's relatively easy. If you work out the timeline and you've got a contact that's in the association, and you go, mate, did he ever serve? And they can tell you in a heartbeat whether he ever served, or certainly whether he served it during that period of time. And so I think a lot of it's people don't understand the organisations they're in. The Met has got so many tentacles and so many specialisations and things that, I'm still finding stuff out now. Having been, I retired in 2008. I speak to people that do and go, I didn't even know the job did that. There'll be people seconded to security services, to SIS, to there'll be people working out of embassies all around the world that are part of the Metropolitan Police. I've done overseas operations and training packages in a lot in the Caribbean. And I remember we were running a package in Jamaica, and he's not an ambassador, is he? What would he be? The high. Call him the ambassador anyway. Would have a monthly party at the
the commissioner.
Yeah,
High Commissioner?
High Commissioner, yeah. So he'd have a party with a different theme each month, like the second Thursday of the month or whatever. And I remember going there, and honestly, it was so funny because it was a pool party, and they had local models, male and female, sort of coming out of the room at the end of the thing and sort of doing a little boardwalk around the edge of the swimming pool.
All right.
And they were just, honestly, it was like a Met reunion. There was flying squad guys over there on an inquiry, a murder inquiry. There were guys from the Central Drug Squad. There was National Crime Agency. There was all sorts. There was a National Crime Agency bloke actually attached to the High Commission. Anyway, all of a sudden, we were just having a chat, got beers in our hands, and there's all this, the good and the great of Jamaica are all gathered there. And suddenly this big cheer goes up, and I turn around, and there's this little fat flying squad detective who's stripped down to his underpants. He's pulled his underpants right up on the thing, and he's mincing down the side of this swimming pool like all these Met coppers just cheering, and you can see the High Commission and anyone senior going, burying their head in their hands and going, why have we invited these animals? So yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff that goes on all around the world that the Met are involved in. It's not the same Met that it was when I retired, but they do stuff all over the world. And if you're an Eddie Cohn and you've only worked at one little local police station for your 12 years service, and you've not done anything particularly inspirational, you wouldn't know all about this other stuff, and you wouldn't know that by trying to claim to be part of it, you're actually opening up a big world of hate for yourself.
Begs the question, why do it?
I think it's a sort of a mental health issue, to be honest.
I think it is, but I didn't get that vibe, Tom. I didn't get that vibe.
But the thing is con men are con men because they're convincing.
I get it. Like,
There was a young recently retired army officer that had gone into business with him, and they were taking money off of. I don't say this in a bad way against the officer because he didn't know what Cone was like, but they were taking money, resettlement money off of soldiers to go through an SIA bodyguard course, and they were being treated by Cone. Now, if Cone had gone along and go, right, I'm going to teach you some jiu-jitsu and some arrest and restraint techniques, then fine. But he's not. He's there posing with pictures of Glocks in his hand and claiming to have been a firearms instructor and claiming to be anti-terrorist squad, and and that's the issue. You've got people because they are good. That's the whole essence of it, isn't it? Con men are good because they con.
Yeah. I mean, I won't. That you mentioned, I think before we're off air, like you thought I'd pull the episode. I won't put it down, and on two reasons. Two reasons, if I'm honest. And one is, I don't know. On the balance of probability, he's probably talking shit about a lot of things, right? But I don't really know. And the second reason is that, and this is from a similar experience with a previous episode with a military guy who turned out to be a bloke that lied about a lot of stuff, and that really angered me. And I initially pulled that episode, but I see that as like an element of sort of censorship. I'm doing it myself. It's like I'm pulling that. Okay, why am I hiding something? Maybe I made a mistake as much as having the guest on talking shit did. But secondly, I feel like, okay, if these guys are bullshitting, hey, they've made their bed and they can lie in it. There's the lies. Yeah, there they are. I don't want to hide. I don't want to hide the poor behaviour. If you know what I mean. Yeah, go to town as far as I'm concerned, and that's how I see it. And again, I'd rather my mistakes be up there as well. It's kind of ties into the integrity of the HR and around it.
Yeah. No, I understand that reason. It makes absolute sense.
But it does frustrate people who dislike these people, though. Like,
no, I don't know him well enough to dislike him. I dislike what he's done. He strikes me that, like I said, most of these people are quite affable because they've got to be to actually, get in amongst you.
His episode was very similar to the other one I just mentioned. I won't mention the other person's name, right? Yeah. But it was very similar to that one in that the lessons, it was good conversation. There's a lot of mental health chatting there, a lot of resiliency chatting, and it was like I felt it was really. It's one of the things that pissed me off about it. It's one of the things that really pissed me off about the earlier episode with this other person. It was so valuable in terms of what someone could get from it who could do with a little help and advice and guidance on how to go through hard times. As an example, that's what's frustrating about it. Like Eddie he's got experience in things that other people don't have. He can articulate a story. He can articulate a message. He can articulate himself well. He communicates well. He has got, he's, again, with the BJJ, he's a successful BJJ practitioner.
But this is what amazes me. It's like, I put something.
He's got his own gym up North London, not far from you.
I put something on my Instagram about him, and I went, I said, I've got a khaki belt in Ludo, and I've got no martial arts stuff whatsoever. But from everyone I speak to, if you dig down, you'll get people that, he's not as good as he says he is, and all that sort of crap. But he's obviously good enough to enter competitions, and he's obviously good enough to teach it. And he's got he's just regular, ordinary, day-to-day police duty, making arrests, doing stops in the street. He's got some really good ideas about officer safety and stuff like that. And I just think to yourself, why, when you're perfectly good at certain things, shouldn't you just stick with your strengths instead of just making crap up and trying to, expand your, people's opinion of you? Just stick at what you're good at. I don't understand why people feel the need.
That's the thing that gets me. I just don't understand it in this day and age as well. It's just so easy.
It's such a small world. It's such a small world. Yeah. He could have got away, without the internet, without podcasts, he could have got away with that for years and years and years, and no one would have been any the wiser.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, let's put Mr. Cone in a cupboard. Cupboard door closed.
Okay.
I wasn't expecting to talk about him, but I actually feel...
No, I felt like we should.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I said off air, like your community probably expect it to be mentioned, because I know that... So and I think it would have been kind of an elephant in the room the whole time anyway. Yeah, you know what I mean? This not that I enjoyed discussing it, but there we go. Right. you obviously got a lot of experience, firearms, policing, those two separately and together. I mean, in general, with the Met, were you only with it just with the Met you were?
Yeah, I was only with the Met. I was brought up in Sussex.
Yeah.
Went to school in Sussex.
You're going to start right from school. Right. I haven't got to a question yet.
All right, okay. I was just,
Go on. Brought up in Sussex.
I was brought up in Sussex. My parents ran a proper old-style 60s holiday camp, Heidi High type thing. And that's, So I had
Did they? Oh,
I had a proper, quite idyllic sort of upbringing. And then I was always a bit army-barmy. Always did sort of guns, always had air guns and, anything like that sort of thing. And I was always off in the woods, shooting squirrels and stuff like that.
Squirrels are tough.
They are tough.
Aren't they tough?
They are nails.
They're a nightmare to kill with an air gun.
Got nasty sharp teeth as well. So, that would be quite dangerous. You get one of those.
I put 7 pellets in one once, 0.22 pellet, not the 1.7, it's 2.2. I put 7 pellets in one once. It was hanging upside down. I grew up in a farm, just shooting all the time. It was hanging upside down in a branch about 20 foot up. 7 pellets in it. It fell off, hit the deck, got up and ran away. Said, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And for people, at the end of the day, we're all mammals, aren't they? And they wonder why, police officers shoot suspects and, nothing happens, But, so I wanted to join the army. And I'll tell you what, you remember the magazines you used to get? I think they still do them. Little sort of half A4 sized, we used to call them trash mags, Commando.
Yeah.
So I love that sort of stuff. I'd read that, love war films. And then when I became a teenager, I used to bunk off of school and go to the cinema. And you asked me what my favourite films were. And there were 2 in particular I liked. There was Serpico, where you got like a New York cop that becomes an undercover, Al Pacino, and then The French Connection. And I just loved like the gritty. I wanted to be a detective. It was the 70s, so you had to have long hair in the 70s. You looked the fashion didn't suit short hair. If you had like short hair and huge flared trousers, it looked like, someone had shrunk your head. So I wanted to be a detective. The last thing I could see myself doing was walking around with a Bobby's helmet on, in the evening all. And if I was going to be a cop, I didn't want to be a cop in Bognor Regis. So I thought, I want to go to the big city. I had an aunt that lived just next to Hendon Training College. And so the train used to go straight past it. And I'd sit on the Northern Line going into London, and you'd see them on the obstacle courses and going around the skid pan and being paraded. And so that kind of got in my mind a little bit. And eventually I left school early. I had to make a decision what I wanted to do. So in the back of those magazines, there was like these little cut out sort of squares of paper with the address to, and you filled a little bit back and posted it off. So
to apply?
Yeah. So I applied for the Army, I applied for the Royal Marines,
and
I applied for the police. And the police answered first. And it turned out that was because, rather like now, they were on their chin straps. The police were like, from a morale standpoint, the pay was abysmal. A load of people had joined just after the war, done their 30 years, and were all getting ready to leave. And they had a massive recruitment problem. They couldn't get anyone to come in. They were going to lose all this experience, a little bit like now, really. But what they had then that they didn't have now was a cadet school. And the cadet school was like, in the Met, it was a bit like sort of junior leaders, if you like, in the military. You could go in there at sort of 16 years of age. You were put in a dormitory, you were inspected every day, you were paraded, you did outward bound training.
What age could you join that?
I think it was 16.
16?
It might have even been younger, actually. I'm not sure. I think it was 16. And if you hadn't finished your O-levels, you could do it as part of the cadets.
Why not have that now?
Well, they just sold it all off. Do you know? But I was that naive coming up from Sussex that I didn't realise the cadets school was a thing. So at one end of the Hendon sort of footprint, you had the cadet school, and they were the lads I'd seen on the assault course and the driving school at that end as well. And then the other end was the recruit school. Well, when I joined, what I actually was a recruit. But I thought I was a cadet. I thought cadets were recruits. I didn't realise there was a difference. So it was like my first day at Hendon, all of these ex-cadets who left the parade square at the other end of Hendon like the week before and who'd now joined as recruits. I'm like, at the end, first evening, we're in the bar, and I went, mate, am I not a cadet? No, mate, you're a recruit. I really genuinely didn't know. I was that naive. But yeah, I mean, if I'd have known, I'd have probably left school 2 years earlier and done that. And so I joined the Met basically with a view to being a detective. The first part of my career was all geared towards becoming a detective, and then
What do you mean it was geared towards? You was steering it.
So when you joined the police back then, you had to join as a recruit. When you passed your initial recruit training, you became a probationer. You got posted to your police station for 2 years. Well, you got posted to your police station, and the next sort of 18 months or so was spent as a probationer. So you'd go back to continuation training 2 days a month. You'd have to carry on studying, and then at the end of it, you'd have a final exam, and then you became a warranted officer. You know, you had a warrant card anyway, but so you could make arrests. You were effectively a police officer, but you were a probationer.
Mm-hmm.
Once you'd finished your probationary period, you could apply technically for just about anything that was going. So if you wanted to go traffic division because you were a sad bloke that liked giving people speeding tickets, then you could, apply for traffic. If you wanted to go CID, you could go the CID route. Or if you wanted to go Special Patrol Group, which is the route that I eventually took, then you went that way,
Sorry, quick question. How long was the probation period?
Well, it's 2 years from start to finish.
2 years.
So that 2 years included your time at recruit training, which was about 16 weeks, I think, back then.
Yeah.
So I went there the summer of 75, and I came out just before Christmas of 75. I got posted to Lewisham in South London, which was a good, busy working ground. It was a good place to learn your skills. Like I said, I still wanted to be a detective, but what I started to realise as I became a bit more experienced was that the detectives you saw on the television, the Serpicos of this world, dressed up as rabbis and hanging around on street corners with a 2-inch revolver sucked into their ankle holster, they weren't real detectives. The people that did the exciting plainclothes, dressed like a vagrant, street duty coppering weren't detectives. They wore suits, right? They smoked like chimneys. There was a big drinking culture back then. And for the most part, you seem to see them sitting in an office on a typewriter, with a cigarette hanging out the corner of their mouth and a big beer belly, or they were down a pub, speaking to an informant. It was very different to what I sort of envisaged it would be.
So Life on Mars is relatively accurate in some respects.
Well, it's funny because when Life on Mars first came out, I had about 20 odd years service, and I was in the unit. I was in the firearms unit, and I went into work, and people, the younger lads, are taking the piss out of me. It was like when you joined, Tom, was it? And I went, and someone said something like, it was just so far-fetched. And I went, mate, it really wasn't. It really wasn't.
Oh, really?
No, it was, some of it was far-fetched, but for the most part, I thought if you spoke to any copper of that era and said, what's your favourite TV show? They're all going to say Life on Mars or The Sweeney. The Sweeney was, in its period, it was only on, I think, for about 6 or 7 years, I think, but that really captured the banter and, the drinking culture and all the rest of it, and at the end of it, they bashed up the bad guys and you're fucking Nick, son, get your strides on, that sort of stuff. So it was very like, the Sweeney back then. It was anyway. So anyway, I went on the crime squad with a view to being a detective. I think I probably might have made quite a good detective, but by that time I decided it wasn't really for me, and I was more into street policing. And so I applied for a unit called a Special Patrol Group, the SPG.
Yeah, you mentioned these earlier. Yeah. I've never heard of this, so explain them to me.
How old are you? Do you mind me asking?
40. I'm 43 next year. Next year. Yeah.
So, the SPG was formed in the early 60s, and it was meant to be like the Commissioner's sort of rapid reaction force, really. So rather than being geographically located at a police station and covering a small part of London, there was 6 units dotted around London, sort of geographically spread out, and they would have 3 long wheelbase transit carriers, about 30 officers, a couple of female officers, the rest were mainly male officers, an inspector, 4 sergeants. And if there was nothing happening, there was no crisis going on, then they would patrol areas that bid for them. So let's say for instance, my old division at Lewisham was getting hammered by burglaries. They could approach the Special Patrol Group and say, look, can you come in, flood the area, make as many arrests as you can and make the problem go away. So that's what their day job was. But then if there was a missing child and all of a sudden they needed a load of manpower or a load of resources to search woodland or open countryside or whatever, obviously you could just pool all those 6 units together and you'd have, you know, a load of people to do it. Likewise, public order. So, you know, everybody sort of thought of the SPG. Certainly the left wing thought the Special Patrol Group was some sort of armed paramilitary secret organisation, which they absolutely weren't. I mean, we were just regular coppers, but you didn't get on the SPG unless you were a good street copper. You know, you were good at arresting people. You know, you had a nose for.
So did you have to apply for it?
Yeah, you had to apply. You had to apply pretty much anything really. So I applied several times and got told I didn't have enough service. And then out of the blue, I applied. I didn't hear back, and then the next thing I know, I came in for parade one day, and the inspector on parade went, "Go and sort your uniform out, Tone. You know, brush your hair, and Bob, take Tony up to Scotland Yard. He's got an interview for the SPG." So I went up, had my interview, and then within a day or so, I got a letter saying, or a teleprinter message back then probably saying, "Yeah, you've been accepted." And I went to the 4-unit SPG, which was based on Clapham Common.
But they weren't armed, no.
So they weren't routinely armed, but one unit at any one time, one of the 6 units would be posted to Central London Security. Because you've got to imagine that this is the era of a lot of bombs going off in London. Yeah. We had the guardsmen were injured, weren't they, in a coach, quite close to their barracks near Chelsea. You know, there was virtually always an IRA active service unit doing something in London at any one time. And so Central London was seen as the big risk area. So we would put out a carrier and probably 2 of the guys, perhaps 4 in each carrier, would be carrying revolvers. And so if you wanted a shots course on the SPG, you were pretty well guaranteed you were going to get one. There were guys that went, "Yeah, it's not for me, I don't want to carry a gun." Funnily enough, quite a few were ex-servicemen. They were like, "No, I've done all that. You know, carried a gun in Northern Ireland, don't want to do it again." But yeah, so I got a shots course while I was on the SPG. Back then, I say this every time I do an interview, but nowadays in the Met, I think the minimum initial basic firearms course is about 5 weeks. And that is literally to classify on shoulder-fired weapon, which for most people now is a SIG 5.56 rifle, a Glock 9mm pistol, and that will qualify you to stand outside an embassy. So, I mean, I personally, I'll probably upset some of my former colleagues here. I don't think palaces and diplomatic protection is a job for police. To me, that could be something. You know, you have guard force outside certain barracks, don't you? Mm-hmm. If you go down to, I think some
MPGS.
Yeah, that's it. Some people
military police guard service, something like that.
How does that work? Because you go to some barracks and they'll be protected by MDP, and then you go to another barracks and they've got that guard force. There doesn't seem to be any logic to it.
MDP.
Military police. Sorry. MDP. Ministry of Defence Police.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it used to be
it must be, I don't know, it must be the security classification of the barracks to dictate that.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Because you go to other barracks, it's MPGS and the actual soldiers.
Yeah.
Or sailors around.
Yeah, but yeah, so really to me, I mean, the job could create another national police force, if you like, to do that sort of static protection, because you don't need to be a fully qualified constable to stand outside an embassy or stand outside the Palace of Westminster.
Bit of a waste, isn't it?
It is a bit, really. But anyway, so yeah, it's 5 weeks. Now, that's the minimum course. Most, if you want to go on the ARVs, it's something like 15, 16 weeks or something like that now. When I did mine, it was 5 days.
Days.
Yeah, 4 days on an indoor range, at the end of which, on the Thursday, you classified on a 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson revolver. And then on the 5th day, they bust you up to an old Second World War prisoner of war camp in Epping Forest in northwest London, where they taught you tactics, like a half day of tactics.
So you didn't get trained up in any longs, no?
No, not at that stage. Now, there were people on the SPG that were trained on rifles. So police snipers, police riflemen, call them what you will. But they were trained at that period. They would have been trained on the Enfield Enforcer, which was a civilian version of the L42A1, which was the Enfield 7.62 conversion that preceded the AI. And they trained out to 600 yards on a national qualification, and they would come back for like 2 days a month training. And they were only ever deployed with D11, which was the unit that I eventually transferred into.
I'm sure the L42 was the British Army sniper rifle.
Yeah, it was.
Time as well.
It was. It was basically, it was called the Enforcer, but basically that's exactly what it was. It was the Enfield 7.62 that was still in service during the Falklands, but shortly after the Falklands, they adopted the AI.
Do you think 5 weeks is enough these days?
It's certainly enough to stand outside an embassy.
But what about armed response?
Well, that's nearer 15 weeks, I think.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's quite intensive, yeah.
Okay, I didn't realise that.
So they'll do about, I might get this wrong, but it'll be approximate, but I think they do about a 4-week initial course, which qualifies you on the weapons. No tactics, or very bare minimum tactics. So you have to qualify on the 9mm Glock pistol. You have to classify on a long, and that will be for most of the Met outside of what is now MO19 will be the SIG 516, which is basically a M4 5.56 carbine. If you're not already qualified on the taser, I think you'll do the taser as well. Though I think most people will have done the taser possibly before they come into the process. I don't know. The only other weapon that is available, but I don't think it's carried by. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not carried, but on that 5-week course is the 37mm batting gun, which is exactly the same as the British Army weapon.
What do you think of the taser as an alternative to a ballistic weapon being issued?
It's a fantastic bit of kit when it works, but there are many things that it won't work. So, as an example, talking about the most recent Chris Cabba case, I saw somebody on the internet saying, "Why didn't they use taser?" Well, taser won't go through glass. So that's one of the reasons you won't use taser. The other thing is, depending on the time of year, it can get stopped by a puffer jacket or a wax cotton jacket. And, so the barbs have actually got to come in contact. The other thing is that ideally, to get the maximum effect, I'd have to be at exactly the right range and with the gun tilted at exactly the right angle to get you in your ankle and your shoulder.
Oh, do the prongs separate?
Yes, so they're actually set. So I think it's like 40 degrees or something. So where you put the laser is where the top barb will go, and the other barb will go lower. Because the bigger the spread, the more effect. Because what it's doing, it's putting current through your muscle groups and making them go into spasm. So if obviously all the major muscle groups in your legs and in your chest and shoulders are all crunching up, that's going to have much more effect than if the barbs are right close to
the second barb doesn't strike, it's not going to have
nothing.
Effect.
So
I didn't realise.
So if you fire the top barb and it hits dead centre, but the other one just misses your gonads by an inch and goes between your legs, you've got nothing. Now, the original ones were only single shot, and then you've got to take the cartridge off and put a new cartridge in the throw. So it's a single shot musket. The newer ones are 2-shot, so you get 2 options. But over and over and again, you'll see it where the barbs just don't have an effect. Now, when they do, it's brilliant. I could watch videos of people collapsing like trees that have been cut off at the roots all day long. People will literally go into spasm and just fall like a tree. Most of the injuries that people sustain from taser are sustained from the fall. So if you taser someone, for instance, and they face plant on the edge of the pavement and take all their teeth out, or fracture their skull or something, it's the fall normally that causes the problem rather than the barbs themselves. It's described that a lot of these things used to be called less than lethal. They're now called less lethal because it's like anything else. You don't know the medical conditions necessarily of somebody that you're dealing with. I'm told, that the likelihood of taser actually bringing about a heart attack or something like that is minimal. But you can never say never. So it's called less lethal because the chances of it being lethal are far less. But it's not less than lethal because it's play with words, but that's in policing. A lot of that will be the case.
Is the discharge of a taser treated in the same way in terms of reviewing the action and justifying the action as a ballistic weapon is?
Pretty much all weapons, whether including open hand techniques. If you've used force, you're obliged to report that use of force. So even if you punch someone, or you end up in a tussle with someone, that's a use of force. You should report it. Certainly, if you struck someone with a baton, certainly if you've used taser or CS, or I think it is CS anymore, Parva or whatever it is that they're using, irritant spray, then you're required to report it. And like I was saying to you before we started the interview, police officers in the UK have no more powers to use force, for the most part, than any citizen. The use of force is covered by a thing called Section 3 of the Criminal Law Act, and it actually says a person or any person may use such force as is reasonable in the circumstances in the prevention of crime, the arrest of offenders, blah, 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 blah. And this all goes back to when the police force was created in the sort of 1820s, 1830s. There's an expression that you'll hear, which is that the police are the public are the police. And if a police officer was chasing a suspect, it's like the old medieval hue and cry. Shopkeepers would be, dropping what they were doing and joining in the chase and helping the police. Well, of course, that doesn't happen anymore. What happens now is we all get our phones out, don't we? Well, you or I probably won't, but the vast majority do. And they'll be standing there, giving the police officer advice about how he ought to be doing it better and how he shouldn't be doing it or whatever.
Those people should be arrested.
Yeah. So exactly. So essentially, what you've got now is a situation where we have a law on a use of force that is directed to everybody, but we don't expect the public to actually join in. There's a kind of a moral obligation to, but you're not committing an offence if you don't. But what we then do is we say, well, okay, if we're not going to do it, we've got to teach the police, we have to pay the police to do it, and we have to give them protective body armour, and we have to give them a baton and, irritant spray and tasers and guns, perhaps, if they've got to deal with the worst, most dangerous suspects in society. But then when they use that force, they're then, dragged through the coals over it.
Well, the reason I asked on whether tasers are treated differently, it was my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in a shooting incident, so ballistic weapon, if there's a killing or an injury, that is automatically referred to the IPCC?
I think you're probably right. I can't tell you exactly. I know initially when the taser first came out, it was that was an automatic IOPC referral.
Same with so it was the same with tasers,
but I don't think it is now. I think you're right. I think because the use of taser is very common. And the vast majority of times there's no serious injury caused. I suspect if, say, for instance, someone was tasered and it happened as described, and they've fallen and they've given themselves serious facial injuries, or there was a case a year or so ago where a suspect was tasered and he jumped off the bridge and drowned in the river.
Tasered and jumped off the bridge?
He was tasered as he was jumping over the bridge, I think. Or thereabouts. But anyway,
so that got the taser's fault.
anyway, if a death resulted as it would absolutely be treated in exactly the same way as a firearms thing. But I think you're probably right. I suspect that if it's just an ordinary taser, then it's not going to be investigated by an outside body unless the police referred it to the outside body.
Yeah, I asked because I was thinking of military, and this is slightly different though. But a negligent discharge is, right? You probably got to say in the police, and that is for people listening.
I think we now call it negligent, but for a long period of time it was called an accident, and people like myself as firearms instructors used to go, well, it's not a fucking accident, is it? It's negligent.
Yeah.
If the gun goes off because of a defect on a weapon, it's accidental. If you put your working parts forward and the safety catcher's off and it went off, that's not negligent. You did everything right. You did it in the loading bay, but it was actually a fault on the weapon. Then that's accidental.
Yeah.
But if you've got your finger on the trigger and
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it was this when I was in, and I'm pretty sure it's still the same now. But if you have a negligent discharge on a weapon which has got blank firing rounds and it's a training round, blanks, and it's going to make a loud noise, it gets treated the same as if you had live rounds in it.
Now, for some reason, that made me think of how chasers are treated and ballistic weapons are treated. Now, question for you, while I turn this aircon down a little bit, because I'm going to minute me, is... So, arming all officers.
Right.
Should we arm all officers or not? Would it be net better or net worse for crime in the UK if we armed all
say
officers?
Right now, it's net worse.
Okay, why is that?
What, it would make it worse?
Well, I'd say it was net worse because there's never been in a time in history where the police service, certainly in London, and I suspect across the rest of the country, is in a worse position to train every officer. So let me put it a different let me put it a different way. From a moral standpoint, I would say, and always have said, absolutely 100% all officers should carry firearms.
Yep.
Because even with, let's say for argument's sake, there's 28 armed response vehicles patrolling London at any one time. I'm not saying there is, but let's say for argument's sake there was. If you're an unarmed copper patrolling, part of London, and the nearest car is, 10 miles away, then having an armed response vehicle isn't going to stop you getting killed. So if you think recently there was an incident where a man with a samurai sword killed a child, I think killed 2 other members of the public and seriously injured 2 police officers.
Oh, yeah, where was this?
That was in northwest London. Or North London.
That wasn't that long ago.
No,
was it? That was months.
It wasn't long ago at all. But the first armed response vehicle to arrive at the scene of that incident had come from its base in East London. It was literally coming on parade when they went, there's an incident now. And it took however long it took for them to drive that distance, driving like lunatics on blue lights and two-tones to get there. But in that time, 2 police officers had life-changing injuries. One nearly lost his arm. And eventually he was stopped by tasers literally seconds before the armed response vehicles pulled up on scene. So you see a female officer tasering the suspect. He goes down, and then you literally see the armed response vehicle guys running up to her after she's fired the shot.
Blonde lady,
yeah. So, so the armed response vehicles were just seconds away. Had they got there earlier, there's a good chance he may have been, shot to death as opposed to tasered. But they did have a baton gun with them as well. So they had other tactical options that they could have used to bring this bloke into control.
Is that the incident? So if I'm thinking of that, video. I remember watching that and thinking, so the suspect went down, and I was wondering why the guy is a male copper behind her. And there's a couple of them. They don't jump on that guy.
No, because there's still cables attached to him, and they've still got control over him with the taser.
Okay.
And they're probably waiting for advice from the taser officers would be responsible for that. They would now say, right, I've got him, you move forward. And you'd like to think that they could QBOs if you want. They want to be telling people as opposed to just everybody running in.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Oh, all right, that's good context.
So yes, from a purely moral standpoint, I think it is wrong as a society to expect people, men and women, to run into danger on our behalf without the correct equipment to protect themselves and the public. That's from a purely moral standpoint. From a purely practical standpoint, like I said, there's never been a worse time. We've sold off Hendon Training College, so there's a firing range at Hendon. We could have taken every recruit through firearms training during their recruit training. We used to have ranges. We used to have about 6 indoor ranges dotted around central London that were proofed up to 9mm, so you could shoot 9mm MP5s, pistols, or whatever. But because we sold off all the police stations, and because we've moved to 5.56, those ranges became redundant. So now, if you trained 30,000 officers, or even 20,000 officers in the use of firearms, there would be physically nowhere to do continuation training, refresher training. So there's all sorts of practical reasons. And the other thing is, what do you do with people that don't meet the criteria?
Can we just come back a second?
Yeah, sure.
So I think there's a difference between from the morality standpoint of
Right.
there's a difference between expecting people to jump in and obligating people to jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it's okay to expect people to jump in to assist. Like I don't know. Maybe the message should be: if you can do something to assist, then do so. If you feel confident enough to assist, then do so. If you don't, cool.
But if you do, you should do something.
Yeah.
And that comes from a position of consistently seeing, there's videos everywhere about things that go on, whether it's in America, whether it's here, whether it's in any country in the world, and you see, as you were just saying just now, something violent has gone on the street, or someone is being treated bad, whoever they are for whatever reason, be it a mugging, be it a beating, be it hit and run, whatever, and people get their phones out to film. Whereas if that was 20 years ago, 15 years ago, arguably, those bystanders would be less of them filming it, there'd be more of them jumping into assist.
And I think the difference is, 15 years ago, the people doing the attacking wouldn't have had machetes, and they wouldn't have had, Rambo knives and things. It's got a lot worse.
But it's part of that. So there's a multitude of reasons, right? Especially when you're talking about London. Well, UK cities in general, there's a multitude of reasons why that has gotten worse. But it's part of that getting worse, part of it, not attributable to the fact that there's less of a deterrent for these people to do it. A person can go into the street and rob a phone off someone and probably going to be able to run off or cycle off without being hammered.
Well, there's something I don't really understand, and I'm sure someone that's current and serving would probably be able to answer this better or make the point better. But when I joined the Met, there was about 27,000 officers. There's now around about 30,000 officers. Only about 3,000 more. But we were able, in a very small geographical area, so there was something well over 100 police stations in London. And so, just drive half a mile down a road and you'll go from one police station to another police station. And they were all sort of mirror images of each other in so far as they'd have one fast response car driven by an advanced driver for pursuits, called the area car. And that would get all the 999 calls. There'd be a station van that had a main set, so that could get 999 calls. And that would be used for transporting prisoners. Then you'd have about 4 or 5 panda cars, which weren't fast response cars, but they allowed police officers to go and do all the routine calls, go and arrest a shoplifter, go and tell Mrs. Jones that her son's been arrested, and all that sort of stuff that police officers have to do. But it was covering a very small geographical area. Well, what's happened is a succession of Conservative and Labour mayors have just sold off all the police stations. I mean, I've got the statistics somewhere. I can check them on my phone. It's frightening how many police stations have been closed. There's like 8,000 ambulance staff in London and 5,000 firemen. And if you put all the ambulance stations together and all the fire stations together, they have got almost 3 times as many stations as the police have, and that's an organisation of 30,000. It is. I mean, statistically, it's embarrassing. So now what happens is police officers have to patrol huge areas. So all the local knowledge is gone. There's so many things. But what I don't understand as somebody who remembers the past is why is there no one out on the street? Because actually we've got more officers. So why are there so few officers patrolling? And one of the reasons, of course, is that crime has changed phenomenally. When I was a copper on the street, even when I went back to do regular police duty briefly in the 90s, crime was pretty simple, really. There was no computers, so it was either burglary, car theft, robbery, shoplifting, and fraud. Fraud was the most complicated one to deal with, cashing checks and things like that. So it was all street-based. Coppers patrolling the street were able to stop that. Well, of course, so much stuff now is done on a computer. And the way in which so that involves lots of police officers sitting in offices like this, glued to a screen, doing whatever it is that they do. If you look at murders used to be solved by detectives having informants, and suspects' names being put up and general inquiry. Now it doesn't work like that, and probably for the best. Murders now are investigated by CCTV, and it takes hours and hours and hours to find where the CCTV footage is, obtain the footage, screen the footage, look through hours and hours and hours of footage, or it's solved by cell site analysis. Being able to tell that you must have been near the scene because your phone was turned off, a mile down the road, and the next time do you know what I mean? So, so the way in which crime is investigated has taken so many police officers off of the street. Counter-terrorism. Counter-terrorism used to be the anti-terrorist squad, 150 detectives. Now, post 9/11, it has become just this massive growth industry. and it just employs hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of police officers in counter-terrorism. And you think to yourself, well, what actually concerns the general public in London more, terrorism or knife crime? Because the day after the bombs went off in 2005, people still got on the buses and got in the tubes because they've got to get to work. All right, and we're pretty, we're pretty stoic, the Brits, aren't we? It's like, oh, bombs went off,
Not as much stoic as they used to be, but
Not,
we're still
yeah,
pretty
but,
stoic.
It's like, what's the chances of it happening tomorrow?
Yeah.
Not, is it? They went off yesterday, so they all get on the tube and the train, and everybody forgets about it quite quickly. Now, if I was the father of a young black teenager in, I don't know, Croydon, I'd be terrified every time the little bugger left the flat. Because I'd be concerned he was, going to get stabbed for being in the wrong area or looking at someone wrong. So that's terrorism to me. But we put all our resources into the occasional, mentally ill misfit that's latched onto a religion and thinks that's an excuse to do something bizarre and dangerous. It has to be done. But it means that an awful lot of resources that should be dealing with stuff that is of more concern to people isn't happening. And I understand it's difficult to, work out where those resources should be put. But what it means is, actually, on the grand scale of things, the amount of officers in London, the other thing I didn't mention, of course, is in the 1970s when I joined, there was 6 million people in London. There's now, is it 9 million, something like that? So there's, and we now live in a city where 300 languages are spoken. So it's a totally different society with, more people, much more difficult crime, but we've still only got roundabout or less resources than we had in the 70s. So, I think something needs to change.
I interviewed someone a few months ago, and unfortunately the episode's not been released. It's embargoed for reasons I won't go into. But on that, we were discussing. So he's from London, grew up North London, and he was talking about, and he's involved with youth communities now, helping, trying to help young people get away from that gang culture, all those horrendous cultures that they're so easy to get dragged into around here these days. And he was telling that interview I did with him, that really changed my mindset on my thought about safety in London. Before that point, I was thinking, I'm right. Like, I'll be concerned about my daughters coming in and going into an area that I don't know about. I don't know the area very well, but Central London, fine. The other areas, fine generally. And it was after that episode, I thought, actually, I literally thought, now I'm not confident about going into certain areas I don't know. Before that episode, I go anywhere. I don't care. And in my mindset, I'm ex-military. I can handle myself. I'm 6'1". I'm not a small guy. I look like I would be a handful. Even if I wasn't, I look like I'd be like, that's enough of a deterrent for most people. Maybe. After that episode, in it, he was explaining to me how prevalent and how volatile this area code, this gangland, or this territory domination thing is from area to area, and how ruthless the young men predominantly are with it. You go into the wrong place, you literally, he was saying to me, you're more than likely to get stabbed. If they confront you, you're going to get stabbed if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. They won't take reasoning. They won't it's a weird, and he was attributing a lot of it to drill rap as being a big instigator for it.
Which is most current thing in terms of sort of armed policing certainly is the recent acquittal of Sergeant Martin Blake for the shooting of Chris Cabba, and of course he was part of a drill collective.
Was he really?
Yeah. So he was part of an organised crime group that goes under the name 6-7. Which is it was also a drill collective, but members of that collective have been convicted of county lines drug smuggling, of shootings, of stabbings, and all sorts of things. And Chris Cabell was one of those. But interesting, you talk about dangers. I mean, I'm 67 now, sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm 67, because I'll get on the
Don't look it, mate.
but thank you very much. But yeah, you have to remind yourself that you're not a young man anymore. And even if you are, you're not carrying a knife. And I quite recently, actually, I got off my tube, not my tube, my train station. And there was something going on at the ticket barrier where a young black lad had basically was trying to get through without paying. And he'd been stopped by a ticket collector, a black guy. And I said something like, "Excuse me," and I went past them. Next thing I know, I can hear this voice shouting at me from behind. And I turn around and it's this kid. And he thought I'd said, he'd mistaken "excuse me" for me saying something to him. And I just basically said, "I'll just get out of my face, mate." Basically told him to fuck off. And next time he took a swing at me. And I was just quick enough to move my head back, and he clipped the end of my nose. And my wife was waiting there in the car to pick me up. And I just lost it, and I just shouted at him like, "What, you think you're bigger? You're picking on a granddad." I fell back on the granddad defence. And he just he looked a bit puzzled, and I got in the car and drove off. And my missus going, "What are you like? Why didn't you?" And I said, "I didn't say anything. I just said, excuse me, But it can go wrong really, very quickly. Now, if he'd had a knife, and he probably did, that could have gone really badly wrong for me. But for the most part, and this is one of the things I don't get about the whole Chris Cabba thing, is there's been this, there was a panorama program that I participated in that came out the other night where the program was sort of making a big thing about the race of
I've
Cabba.
heard bad things about this.
Yeah.
They
and it
wasn't too...
The whole thing was race. It was like white police officer shoots black guy, and everyone's up in arms of it. And another, lots of black people from his sort of circle of friends going, another black kid, killed by a white policeman. And you go, white policemen aren't the problem. Black kids are not getting killed by white policemen. Black kids are getting killed by black kids. 2 weeks before Chris Cabba was shot, he ran through a nightclub dance floor packed with innocent young black kids shooting at a rival gang member.
He did?
Yeah, he did. He's captured on video, running through, shooting. And had he not been killed by Martin Blake when they tried to arrest him, he would have stood trial for that and been convicted along with 3 or 4 other guys. Yeah. So, the day before he was shot, Chris Cabba and others drove past a car parked outside a primary school in Brixton with other black gang members in it, I'm assuming, and opened fire on them with a shotgun. So, thankfully, for the most part, these gangsters, and that's what they are shooting each other. And that applies across the board. I mean, there's, we've got Albanian mafia, you've got Turkish mafia, we've got Asian, we've got all of these organised crime groups, and a lot of them are, based on cultures. But it just seems that, we're too quick as a society to blame police officers because they're predominantly white.
Well, this is you mentioned the key word there. This is you mentioned the key word, and the key word is culture, right? It's not about black, or in this instance, what we're talking about, it's not about coming with black. It's about the culture you came from, which was predominantly black. It's an indicator. It's just a descriptive, right? And the problem with it all, so with the gang stuff is related, is that it normalises the carrying of these fucking weapons for young people. It normalises it, where you've got people who aren't even part of it carrying to defend themselves, maybe, or carrying for other reasons because they want to be like the cool guys, right?
You got to, and like you said, you mentioned the drill music. The lyrics, if you can understand them, actively promote it.
This is what I had no idea about it, and I was surprised when he said it. I thought, really, music is causing this? And he said, and his opinion was it should be banned. It's like he was saying the government know about it, the police know this is an issue. Why can they not go and ban it? Well, obviously you can't. It's difficult to ban an art form. But he was saying exactly what you said there. He said it's a popular form of music, and in it, the artists, the fucking arseholes from those areas will be given, it is part of the lyrics, are given instructions on who is okay, who is not, what you should do, what should not, in terms of when people come into the wrong area. My friend, you mentioned London Ambulance Service earlier, off air, and my friend works for London Ambulance Service. Just going back, a little anecdote here. You were saying things can just happen so quick. And he was off duty, he was walking home, he goes past a bunch of school kids and they're picking on another school kid. I think these are early teenagers. Young, school kids anyway. And they were getting violent with this one kid. He stepped in, tells everyone else to fuck off and leave him alone. Like, leave him alone. You're right, kid. That kind of thing. The mob of school kids starts getting super angry, like getting vicious, and he's ex-military, and he's been in and he's on an ambulance service anyway. So he's been in. You can tell. When things are. There's a tipping point, isn't there, in the atmosphere? You go, there's something changed here. And he ended up with the boy in a shop doorway. And as he turned round to see what they were doing behind, flash of a knife from one of the kids. And then he basically grabbed the kid and bolted, like not hanging around, not going to argue, like bolted, jumped on the nearest bus with this kid, and then off he went. School kids with knives. And this was, that would have been, I think, the Holloway Road area. Just, It just seems that the whole narrative, this whole,
white police officer. I mean, the Met, come under a lot of criticism, and a lot of it, quite justifiably. But to suggest that they haven't been trying to recruit or promote, ethnic minorities into the police force, and haven't tried hard enough is utterly ridiculous. Like I said, I joined in 1975, and there was a young black lad, similar age to me, who was in the class behind me. So he joined the week behind me at training school. And we both got posted to South London. I got posted to Lewisham. He got posted to neighbouring Catford. We did all our probationer training together. We did all our driving training together. And we were good mates. And when we were first able to apply for the Special Patrol Group with about 3 years service, they used to advertise for it like once a year. We both put in for it. And my mate got it first time.
Oh.
And I got told, you ain't got enough service. And I went, he's got a week's less service than me. Now, he was a good copper. He was really popular. Everybody liked him. Sadly, he passed away way too young. But, I never begrudged him getting the job. But he admitted himself. He said, I got it when you didn't get it, because for the Special Patrol Group, which was quite controversial because it was like, the public order people, they were the people that went in mob-handed to sort of square things up, weren't very popular with the black community. So obviously having a black copper on an SPG unit was seen as an absolute bonus, by the Met. We were running ethnic minority or visibly ethnic minority and female recruitment programs to get into the firearms unit way back in the mid-80s. So it's not like we haven't been trying to recruit people into that role. But I just think that this perception that, the point I'm making is that regardless of that, perhaps it's a societal thing. So, for instance, the Asian community, there's a disproportionately large amount of people in the Asian community. They do very well educationally, and a disproportionate amount will go into the medical profession and become doctors, etc. And that's seen as, by a family, they're hugely proud of that. If an Asian lad wants to join the police, that's seen as a lesser thing. And so from a cultural point of view, it's not a good thing. With the Afro-Caribbean community, because of this sort of perception that the police are racist, it's not seen as a good thing to go into. And I'll give you one example. My paramedic was telling me the other night, literally a couple of days ago, she went to a stabbing outside a nightclub at about 5 o'clock in the morning. It's raining. Young black lad's been stabbed in the leg. And the first police officers arrived on scene. By the time she got there as the first paramedic unit, the police officer had been dealing with them for about 5 minutes. They'd already got a pair of tough cuts and cut away the clothing.
Arterial bleed, was it?
Well, no, it wasn't, but they were trying to find where the blood was coming from.
Yeah.
So they cut all the clothing away, and they found a single stab wound, and he was bleeding fairly profusely. But by the time she'd arrived, they'd packed it, they'd wrapped it. It didn't warrant a tourniquet or anything. They cut all his clothing off. He's on the pavement. They've covered him in silver foil blanket, and out of officers, about 50% of them had taken their coats off in the rain to put over this young black guy. The mother turns up and starts having a go at the police officers. Why is he out here on the pavement? Why is he out here in the rain? You know, why haven't you done anything? You know, why haven't you taken him in? It was closing time at this thing, and the club had closed the doors and locked it. That was it. So, you know, these police officers are getting soaking wet because they've taken their own raincoats off to protect this guy. They've not saved his life, but they could have saved his life. Do you know what I mean? It's like, as it turned out, the bleed wasn't that bad, but they've had to cut off all his clothing. Why have you cut his clothing off? And they're like, you can't. It's really hard when you're doing your very best for people.
The race thing is very frustrating. It's like, you know, in that instance, it could quite easily be the mother is venting, and that's the easy thing she needs to vent about. She's worried.
Yeah, and I get that.
There's other situations where, and more often than not, we live in a situation at the moment, like an environment at the moment where if race is if skin color is disingenuously used as a tool to gaslight or take attention away from actually the real truth. Look, Kabah, for example. Yeah, and look at all the nonsense there. That was all race related. And okay, well, if that had not been a factor thrown up and latched onto by the media as well, not helped by, and government as well, actually not helped by, then arguably more of the actual facts about it would have become known, and the background of this guy would have become known, and it would have been treated a lot differently, I think. And maybe the officer.
I think the problem is that a lot of it comes down to pure legality. You know, our laws, are ancient by and large. I know we're always writing new laws, but if you actually take, the rules regarding evidence, I suspect they've barely changed in a very long time. I think probably the last major thing was the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which was brought out so that police persons under arrest were only interviewed. You couldn't interview them in the street once you'd reached sufficient evidence to arrest. You couldn't then question until they were back at a police station.
How is this relevant to the Kabah incident?
Sorry?
How is this relevant to the Kabah incident?
So what I'm saying is that all of our laws in relation to what is eligible, relevant and admissible in a court of law, were written before social media, were written before, the technology that exists today. And so we're stuck in this country, and people. I know a lot of cops, and me included, look at video footage from, say, America, where you've got a chief of police will stand up 2 days after a shooting and go, right, I'm going to brief you now on what exactly what happened in the shooting of this young man, and they will show the body-worn video footage, and they'll have a timeline and all the rest of it, so that people can see, the public can see very quickly what actually happened. Now, if you look at some of the major disorder we've had in this country, like Mark Duggan, for instance, when Mark Duggan was shot in whenever it was it 2011?
I don't know.
Well, it was just before the Olympics, wasn't it? And basically the whole of the country was set light, wasn't it? Where there was
Mark Duggan, the police officer. Police officer.
No. Mark Duggan was a young black criminal who was on his way probably to shoot somebody with a gun. It was an intelligence-led operation. We knew that he'd picked the gun up, and he was stopped. And when he was stopped, the officer said he saw him go for his waistband, and he shot him. And a gun was recovered nearby. But basically, riots took place. Now, my attitude to it is this. If the police office of the police service, the Metropolitan Police Service, had been able to sit down with the Independent Police Complaints Commission at the time and gone, right, what can we say now? Because we've got 150 potential rioters outside Tottenham Police Station kicking off. The family are there. What can we do? What information can we give out publicly now to diffuse the situation? And we were able to say to the IPCC, can we mention the fact that this was an intelligence-led operation? In other words, we didn't just pick on him randomly. Mm-hmm. Yes, we can. Can we say that a gun was recovered at the scene? Yes, we can. Can we say that the police officer that was wounded by a police bullet? He wasn't shot by the thing. If all that information had come out, I'm not saying it would have made a huge amount of difference, but I think there's a potential that it could have, because what happened was, if there is a void, that void will get filled. And we've seen it recently with the young kids getting killed up in Southport. If you don't say what happened,
Manchester Airport as well.
Manchester Airport as well.
If you look there, I've discussed this on. There's another. I do a weekly current events thing with a friend. It's called Horizon Scan, and we discuss this on there. And one of the.
Is that another ex-parachute regiment lad?
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And we discussed in there a couple of times. Exactly your point. Man, if they would just release the fucking information straight away, the body cam footage, because I think it was almost a week, maybe 4 or 5 days from the Manchester Airport
before
there was what. So up until that point, so the first thing that got released on the Manchester Airport was the really short clip, booting the guy, stamping the guy in the head. Yeah. Remember?
Yeah.
There was much more than that.
Yeah. And
you had all the other angles. And I'm sure it took about 4 days for that to release. In the meantime,
but the thing is,
parts of the country went to pot.
But the thing is, I don't know if you're aware of this, it didn't get released.
Huh. Okay.
It got leaked.
Okay.
So it was. So I had exactly. So I put something on my Instagram saying, why are we now finding this out? And those responsible for holding it back should hold their heads in shame. Blah blah blah. It transpired that it was leaked to the press. No actual body, neither Greater Manchester Police nor the IOPC made a decision to show that footage. It was shown by the press. They got hold of it.
So,
which makes it even worse to me.
So what is stopping immediate or within 24 hours crisis meeting? Exactly as you said, we need to get more information out now. This is a tinderbox. It's because it's one of those. We know what really happened.
I think what it is, it's because the IOPC investigate the police. That's their job. And the police are required to hand over investigations to the IOPC. So in an incident that's controversial like that, where it looks like a police officer has deliberately stamped twice on a person's head for no apparent reason, they've handed it over. So the police can no longer say anything about it because it's not their investigation. It's now the IOPC's investigation. And I just think that the IOP is a totally flawed organisation. For many reasons. I mean, we could have a podcast just on that. But
you had a run in with it, right?
Sorry?
You had a lengthy
run. No, I haven't actually. Because the IOPC is a rebrand of the IPCC. So what happens is every time they screw up beyond belief, they have to get reinvented and rebranded. So they've been the PCC, the IPCC, and now they're the IOPC, and next week there'll be something else. But especially after the whole Cabba, the trial. What needs to happen is that the government need to step in and say, right, we are going to scrap you again. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come up with another 4 letters, But we need to completely rewrite what your job is about. So, for instance, at the moment, their remit is basically to investigate issues, but their only real responsibility in terms of care is to the complainant or the complainant's family. So if you look at all of the press releases in relation to the Cabba incident, it's all about the Cabba family and, we have to have justice for the Cabba family, we have to do this, we have to do that. They're under no obligation to have any care whatsoever for the officer under investigation or his family. And of course, in this instance...
That's shocking, really.
Well, it is. But I get it. I get it when it was originally set up. You're there to investigate police wrongdoing, okay? And so what we've got is this complete separation where the two parties barely talk to each other. Now, if you change that and you said, right, so for instance, you can't just leave a police officer in limbo for 2 years. You've got to give him regular monthly updates so that he knows what's happening with the investigation. The length of their investigations are utterly ridiculous.
Well, how long was yours going?
Well, mine's an exception to the rule. If I told you that I shot someone in...
It was 8 years or 9 years?
April 2005, and I stood trial in June of 2015.
Right.
So 2010, but that wasn't the IPC's fault exclusively. It was actually the fact that I'd shot someone, and the intelligence that that I'd partly based my decision to fire on was what we call Ripper based, which means it's covered by the Regulation of Investigative Powers Act, which means that it's not admissible in a court of law. In the United States, a phone tap, for instance, or technical surveillance, if you and I were conspiring to commit a robbery and we were stupid enough to be bugged while we said it, that would convict us. In the UK, it's inadmissible.
Why is that?
Because it's just the way it's written up. In the UK, the police can use that intelligence to then form a plan to arrest you, but they have to get the sufficient evidence. So basically all that is a clue. That's right. We think they're going to do a robbery on this date. Right. We need to mount a surveillance operation and follow them and watch what they do. And when it gets to a point where they're about to do it, we'll spring on them and catch them with the balaclavas and the shotguns.
So, because what surprised me about that, yours, is that you go drive through the calls all that time, only for to go through all the different processes, all the different steps, going, yeah, this is he's probably done wrong here, probably done wrong here, all the way to the end for a jury to majority verdict find you not guilty. Was that because, so at that point, was that previously inadmissible evidence admissible?
Well, it's a really...
Did it change?
Well, it's a really interesting fact. So,
I don't understand how all those...
So basically what happened is I shot someone on the last day of April 2005 and I was investigated by...
Do you mind me asking you about this?
No, not at all.
Okay.
So I've written a book about it. So, it's Lethal Force, Tony Long.
Plug it away.
So, yeah, I was investigated for 6 months, that's all, by the IPCC, the newly formed IPCC. They were desperate to prove that they weren't anti-copper. So that it was
Was it an automatic referral?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
But it was investigated when the IPC were first formed. One of the criticisms of their predecessor was that they didn't have a lot of experienced investigators. So when they rebranded, they recruited a lot of former senior detectives, senior investigators from Customs and Excise, senior investigators from the Post Office, most of whom nowadays would be looked upon as pale, male and stale. But they had a world of experience at investigating, and they'd been people at the sharp end. You know, there were people in their sort of early 50s probably who'd had life experiences, you know. And so they looked at it and they listened to my evidence and they did it, and they decided in 6 months, which is, you know, a fairly lengthy period of time, I thought, that I'd acted in accordance with my training. I'd fired normal rounds that were necessary in the circumstances, and that I'd acted lawfully, and their recommendation was that no further action should take place. I was then reinstated to full operational duties. Their findings were sent to the Crown Prosecution Service, who put it in front of a Silk, which is a highly experienced barrister. He looked at it, probably charged him £1,000 a day to do it, or more, and he decided I'd acted lawfully as well. So almost to the day, a year after the shooting, it was decided that I'd acted lawfully.
Ah.
Now, the problem was that you have to have an inquest. If somebody's killed, you have to, in circumstances such as that, you have to have an inquest. The problem is that when they wrote the Regulation of Investigative Powers Act, the lawyers that wrote up the legislation didn't think that a coroner would ever need to listen to this ripper evidence. And so all our statements were so heavily redacted, you know, all the intelligence we'd been given about them having 2 MAC-10 submachine guns and what they were going to do, they were going to, you know, rob and murder these Colombian drug dealers, none of that was admissible. And so the coroner said, look, I can't put this in front of a jury because it's so heavily redacted. So then what happened is the government had to basically change the law, and they brought in something whereby a senior High Court judge could sit on his own without a jury, listen to all the evidence, because he was in law allowed to listen to the ripper evidence, and he could make a judgment as to whether or not I acted lawfully or not. Well, this retired High Court judge was 73 years of age. He was very liberal in his thinking.
I knew this was coming.
And he basically had 2 years.
I was thinking that's a great idea if you get the right person to look at the evidence.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
so he had 2 years to basically act like Miss Marples, and they had computer reconstructions done and everything. So by the time 2 years on the line, when he actually got to listen to the evidence at a public inquiry, he'd already pretty much made up his mind that I was a wrong 'un. And the interesting thing was that the barrister for the inquiry stood up pretty much like a barrister would for the prosecution at the beginning of a criminal trial and gave all the evidence publicly. And he gave every last bit of information we were told we could never mention.
Oh.
He gave all the information about the MAC-10 submachine guns, all the information.
Did you make a mistake there then?
Well, no, but I don't know. But I mean, nothing was said, and we're all thinking, well, you could have put if you're going to say that publicly to the press and everyone else, why couldn't the jury have listened to it 7 years ago? Because that's how long it was. So anyway, at the end of this sort of almost 3-year public inquiry, the judge did this huge report, and one of the opening things in his report was, it's the job of the police service in the United Kingdom to protect the public, not shoot them. At which point I kind of knew I was fucked, if I'm honest. And then he went on to say that he felt that I acted unlawfully, but he did say, however, I am judging this on civil standard of evidence, which is different to a criminal. Criminal case is different. So anyway, the Crown Prosecution Service, who had put this in front of a silk and looked at it for 6 months back in 2005, 2006, then looked at it again for about 2 weeks and went, we don't think he did it, but a judge has now said he did it.
Fuck's sake.
So we're going to have to just put it in front of 12 butchers, bakers and candlesticks makers and housewives and let them make a decision for us. Now, I think that's exactly what's happened in the Chris Cabba case as well.
Really? But with all that evidence? Oh, okay, right, yeah. I see it, yeah. Now, why weren't the previous, you had 2 previous shooting incidents, suspects killed. Why weren't those investigated?
Well,
what was the difference? They were.
Well, the interesting
automatic referrals again.
The interesting thing is the very first shooting I had was 1985, Boxing Day 1985, and I shot a guy called Errol Walker. And Errol Walker was a black man who, at the beginning of the siege, had stabbed a black woman 14 times and thrown her body out the window, and then held her 4-year-old daughter for 2 days. So my actions by shooting him in the head saved the life of the little girl, although he'd stabbed her, and he didn't die. Basically, the bullet penetrated his skull and into his brain, but effectively gave him the symptoms of a stroke.
What did you shoot him with?
38 special revolver. But he had his shoulder hunched up, so basically the round has clipped his shoulder. He's lost some of the energy, probably tumbled into his head. Anyway, ask me how long my investigation took. Ask me how long my statement was. Well, there was no investigation and there was no statement, because basically it was almost as if, had I not had a gun, if I'd have struck him with a baton, I'd have probably done, or my truncheon, as they were called back then, I would have probably done more damage. And the reality was, it would have only been investigated back in the 80s if he had made a complaint, or his family had made a complaint about my actions. But actually, he refused to make a complaint against me because he wanted to die. He had done what he did because he wanted the police to shoot him, because he didn't want to go back to prison.
This guy's tapped then.
Yeah, it was like attempted suicide by cop. So he never made a complaint. So subsequently, I was never investigated. In fact, when I stood up to give evidence at the Old Bailey, his barrister said, Mr. Walker would like to congratulate you on your shooting.
No.
And thank you. And thank you. And thank you. So anyway, so that wasn't investigated. So wind it forward 18 months, and I got involved in an armed robbery, which was a classic 1980s South East London armed robbery. So it was like it was a team, all white armed robbers, young lads, whose uncles and cousins and brothers were all like heavy criminals. They were part of an organised crime group, and they were like the tearaway. Again, they'd always fire their guns. They were a little bit uncontrollable. They were like the wild bunch, these three. And we came around the corner shouting, "Armed police!" They're all wearing balaclavas. They've all got guns. All 3 turn around, and I shoot all 3 of them. I wound one, and I kill 2 other ones.
Were you on your own? Or?
Sorry?
Were you on your own?
It felt like it. Yeah. I wasn't. I had a ballistic shield and a pistol, so I was shooting one-handed. And the rest of my team were behind me because we'd all been hidden in the back of a jump-off van. So we'd jump out the back of this Trojan van and run around the corner. But because it was quite a narrow space between 2 vehicles where the robbery was taking place, I was basically, with my ballistic shield, I was taking up most of the space. And by the time anybody else had got into a position with their longs to fire, all 3 suspects were
what was
down.
the distance?
Sorry?
What was the distance for you and the targets?
It ranged from about 5 metres to 8 metres, I suspect.
Okay.
The first one wasn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't that that far. But anyway, that did get investigated, and it got investigated very thoroughly. But back then there was no independent there was no system for an independent. So what they used to do back then is that they would bring in a outside police force. So I was investigated by Essex Police. Now, there's no love lost between Essex and the Met.
I have heard. So I've heard, yeah.
I mean, I have to say, I had absolutely no criticism. They treated me absolutely fairly, and I'm absolutely sure it was a thorough investigation. But of course, nowadays it wouldn't be acceptable. It has to be done by an independent body. You know, it was at the end of the day police officers investigating police officers, but I'd done nothing wrong. You know, so that was that basically. And then over the years, you know, lessons learned, silly little things like I surrendered my Browning pistol at the scene to a detective that I'd actually worked with as a young PC many years before. He came up to me and said, "I'm really sorry, Tone. I'm the exhibits officer on this job. I need to take your gun off you." So I, you know, did my NSPs, unloaded it, handed him the gun, then he put it in the evidence box. And of course, for the rest of the day, I'm the only one that hasn't got a gun in his holster. So everybody's looking at me, you know, back at the police station. Oh, that's that bloke over there. So that was one silly little lesson learnt. So from that point on, we never took guns off people until we were all in a position to surrender our guns at the same time. That was, you know, and then I got named in the press, and that presented lots of problems.
This is for the third shooting.
Yeah, for the second shooting. Well, I got
for the second. Okay.
So for the first shooting, I didn't get named initially, but I gave evidence at the Old Bailey using my name. So, of course, I was all over the papers as a result of that. And then when I got involved in the second shooting, somehow the press got wind of it. And it was like the headlines were like, "Gun Cop Hero" or "Gun Cop Hero Before" or something. So they linked the robbery back to the siege. And so from that point onwards, my name has been quite well known to the press. But in the intervening years, between 1987 and 2005, like I said, little baby steps, learning mistakes from each incident we found ourselves in, we'd come by an internal anonymity process whereby you were given an anonymity code and you kept that on you. And then when you got involved in an incident, whether you be the person that fired the shot, whether you be the witness, everybody used their anonymity codes for their statements, so that only our unit commander, you know, in a list in his safe in his office, could link the anonymity code to our actual name. And that, by and large, has been honoured up until the point you get charged with a criminal offence. So I was still Echo 7 10 years after retirement, or 9 years after retirement. It was only when I got charged that I then was named in the press as Anthony Long. Likewise, Martin Blake was NX121 up until the point where he got charged, and then his name came out. And of course, he's a serving officer, and that's presented him with a huge amount of problems. So, you know, Martin Blake, you know, God bless him and his family. You know, I have some knowledge of what he's been through. We've both been defendants in a murder trial, but you know, circumstances are different. I understand he's got, you know, he's a lot younger than me. I think he may have a young family. I was retired. You know, my kids were grown up by the time my incident came to court. But I just want to say this. You know, if one thing Martin Blake should be proud of is that his sacrifice has and the controversy over his going to court in the first place has resulted in the Home Secretary now saying that there will be an assumption of anonymity up until the point of conviction. So from now on, that shouldn't happen.
It fucking should have been in place anyway.
Well, it should have been.
You know, I would assume that it's a career destroyer these days. You know, arguably, it's like it changes the course of your life for better or for worse, and
yeah. I mean, fortunately, in my case, because I'd retired from the Met, I had to go in through the front door of the Old Bailey every day. So not only did they have my name, but finally, after about 20 years, the press had also got a photograph of me, and so I was kind of screwed. You know, I told this story just the other day, but literally a couple of months ago, my former paramedic and I went into a local pub, and as we walked in, a couple of sort of bruisers came out, similar age to me, broken nose, cauliflower ear. He sort of looked me up and down, and I sort of looked him up and down and nodded, and he nodded back. And we got our drinks at the bar, so sat down, and a couple of minutes later he comes back in, and he's standing at the bar, and he looks over at me, he goes, "Anthony Long?" And it should have been a warning shot, I just wasn't very switched on. I said, "Yeah, do we know each other?" He went, "Yeah, you killed my best mate at school, Nicky Payne." Now that was 1987, and there it is. Now up until I stood trial in 2015, having been retired, for 7 years, people knew my name, but there was no face to put to that name. But now you Google me, and there'll be photographs of me going in and out of the Old Bailey, and photographs more recently of me doing interviews and things. Because once it got to that point where I was compromised, I thought, well, I'm compromised, I'm fucked. There's no point hiding. I might as well write a book and tell my side of the story, because so much shite had been written about me over the years, that it was my opportunity to put the record straight, and kind of reinvent myself, really, because I don't think I've changed that much, and I'm still the same personality that I was. But if you don't know me and all you've read about me is bad stuff, then, like I said, it was my opportunity to do that. But once I'd done that, I did a documentary that came out at the same time as the book, and since then, when something like Martin Blake's trial happens, I become for a few days a bit of a talking head, and if I can do my bit to try and explain to the public the reality of a close quarter confrontation, because they don't understand it, and I get that, but why couldn't you have shot him in the legs? Why couldn't you shot him in the arm? Why couldn't you shot the tyres out? Why couldn't you done this? Why couldn't you done that? And unfortunately, we're all so, influenced by Hollywood and what we see in the movies, James Bond shooting a helicopter down with a wall for PPK from a boat on the Thames. It's like, it just doesn't work like that.
You made some really good points in an interview I read. I don't know if you were being interviewed on TV, but I read the words you said, and you made some really good points in there. And it was, one was the obvious, is you can have. I can be looking at you, and I could be in a situation together. I could view that situation in one way. I can see certain details you can't see, and you can see details I can't see, and we'll make different decisions based on what we can see. And the same goes for after the fact, reviewing CCTV footage, getting people's testimonials, and all the rest of it. Again, you get these different perspectives. You're not going to be able to get, in this case, the officer's perspective.
Shall I tell you why I was acquitted of the Azelle Rodney shooting? Aside from the fact that I was innocent, the fact was that they were holding me to account because there were differences in my statement to other witnesses, and also my statement didn't match up perfectly with the video footage, which was taken from a car behind me. So, you were talking about, we could be standing next to each other. Actually, this vehicle was, quite some distance behind me. So it's a totally different angle. But it transpired that I was charged with murder because my account didn't match some of the other witnesses, or all of the other witnesses, and the video footage. But it transpired that of the 14 or 15 people at the scene, I think 12 police officers and a couple of civilian witnesses, no one got it right. Everyone got things wrong. And actually, while he was playing Miss Marples and he was doing his computer reconstructions and watching the video 1,000 times and slowing it down, looking at it frame by frame, he should have realised there was some classic stuff. Like the one of the civilian witnesses, actually, if you read the first part of his statement, it matched mine almost entirely. It described the behaviour of Azelle Rodney in the back of this car almost to a T. But when the shooting started, he said he saw the rear windscreen blown out, and he saw Azelle Rodney fall to the near side of the car, to the passenger side of the car. The window had shattered and his head fell out of the window, and he saw brain matter. Well, in point of fact, like I said, everything he said up to the point of the shooting, we matched almost perfectly. But we know from the forensics that actually Azelle Rodney fell to the right. He fell towards me. And the reason being is he was sitting in the near side passenger seat and he had a seatbelt on. So the seatbelt, he's probably slumped forward because, several of the shots went into his head. So if it hadn't killed him instantly, it's almost certainly knocked him unconscious. And he's slumped forward. His weight's been in the seatbelt, and then the seatbelt slipped out of his shoulder, and he slowly slid towards me across the back seat. Well, I then debussed the vehicle, so I'm sitting in the front passenger seat. I fired 8 rounds of 5.56 out of a 12-inch barrel. All my brass was coming out, hitting the windscreen, and it was landing. The cylinders were landing on the dashboard in front of my driver for the most part, all but the last shot. He didn't even know I was shooting. X2 Paralad, actually. Didn't even know I'd fired a shot because he's so focused on his job of blocking the vehicle in and everything else, he didn't even hear the gunshots. The bloke sitting behind me, the bloke sitting in the rear passenger seat was ex-bootneck, and he's got the breaching shotgun to shoot the rear tyre out. That's his task. As he opens the back door, he thinks he's coming under fire from the bloke in the car because we believe he's got a full auto weapon. In point of fact, it was my gunshots. But he didn't know I'd fired either. He thought, even though my muzzle would have been literally a couple of feet from his head, out of all of the team, the only person that, and he's X1 Para, the driver of the lead vehicle had got out of the lead vehicle. I mean, he's got his weapon up and he's advancing on the front of the car, but he's looking straight down and sees my muzzle and sees me firing. So out of the whole team, he was the only bloke that knew I'd fired. Now, going back to the bloke on the pavement.
In the heat of battle, it's fucking chaos.
Absolutely that.
Absolute chaos.
Absolutely. And this is what we have to try and explain. And the IOPC, they recruit kids straight from university who've probably never had a scrap in the playground, let alone anything else. So trying to explain to them this. So anyway, I came out of the vehicle. I debussed through the driver's door, as you do, away from the enemy. I came down the side of the vehicle. I came round the back, and the rear windscreen was intact. And I knew that he dropped down and he was on the back seat, but I didn't know whether he was out of the game. So I tried to look through the back window and I couldn't see anything. So I smashed the window with the muzzle of my with a flash hider, and I raked the window out. And I looked in and I couldn't see anything. And I described it in my statement because it was too dark. And I got pulled up for that in court because it was daylight. Actually, what I was looking at was the matte black rear parcel shell for the Golf. And I just thought it was black.
Yeah.
So I then went around the outside. So anyway, the point I'm making is I didn't rake that back window out until probably a good 20 seconds, 30 seconds after I'd fired my last shot. Yet the man on the pavement and other officers swore or wrote down in their statements that they heard the gunshots and saw the rear window shatter.
Yeah, memory.
Yeah,
I'll give you a little anecdote of mine. And people, this is something important. Exactly what you're saying now. People important need to understand this. It's important people understand this who have got no experience of dealing with something like this. Is that what you're articulating there is people's differing memories of events
and perceptual distortion.
Yep, and you would think common sense would say, well, in you're more likely to remember things better in extreme circumstances, and it's not the case. It is absolutely not the case. And I first sort of had my own experience of this many years ago, and it was we were giving a statement to military police after someone had been killed. A couple of guys had been killed actually, and we were given a statement on this, and there was maybe 4 of us or 5 of us gave a statement. We each gave a statement to the military police individually, isolated away, and then afterwards we sat down, we were having a brew. And we started discussing, going over when it happened about a month before. So this, and because of where we were at the time, we were able to interview then, it was delayed.
Yeah.
Long story short, my recollection of events, and it wasn't very long, minutes, probably over 2 minutes, I'd say 2 or 3 minutes, was not wildly wrong, but I had an order of events of maybe 5 key things, and I had 2 of them back to front.
Yeah.
In my mind, even now, I have that order of events as they are, but I know that I'm wrong because all the others, when I described, they said, what did you tell him? And I said, I talked it through. And they went, Hugh, that's not what happened.
No.
I said, it fucking is. And I said, it's not. I said, well, you tell me what happened then. Yeah. They described exactly the same thing, different order.
Right, and it's really interesting.
No way.
No, it's really,
couldn't believe it.
It's really interesting because that's exactly what I just described.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons I'm absolutely convinced that the judge decided that this was the judge at the inquiry decided that I'd acted unlawfully was because he didn't believe my sequence of events. And the problem that I had is that I wasn't allowed to view the video footage that was taken from the rear gunship until 5 years after the incident, right? So when I looked at this video, I looked at it and exactly that, I'm like, that's not exactly how I remember it. Because I remembered it, our drills are that we're all working in covert vehicles, that the Alpha car, the lead vehicle, will be following the bandit car. What it'll try and do is it'll try and do a cheeky overtake, the sort of thing that would piss you off if someone did it to you. They'll get in front of you and then slam the brakes on. Yeah. And the idea is that the person in the bandit car and all the people in the bandit car will be like, what the fuck? Like it's a road rage type thing. So they'll be totally focused on what's happening in front of them, at which point me in the Bravo car will come right up alongside them and basically, HMS Victory them, gunport them, alongside. And then the other vehicle will come up behind. Yeah. And rear shuttle it so that he's completely blocked in and he's completely dominated. And my job as the guy in the front passenger seat of the Bravo car is to be the foot on the ground. Basically, that's me. I'm, cover and movement, classic tactic. Everyone else, I've gone firm. I'm covering while everyone else deploys from the vehicle. Because as you're deploying, you're missing shit. Mm-hmm. You're not going to, until you get into a position of dominance, you're just moving. So that was my role. But when I watched the video, it didn't go like I imagined it had gone. What happened is our vehicle, the Bravo, the Alpha car did an overtake, but it did a proper ambulance pass to my driver. So my driver's gone to do the overtake as well and found there's a car coming straight towards him.
Oh, shit.
He's going to have a head on. So he's moved across to the left, and I didn't realise this at all, but our front near side wing has clipped the rear offside wing of the bandit car and destabilised that. Well, I was so concentrated on the rear seat passenger
Didn't realise.
that I didn't realise we'd even had an impact, let alone we'd nearly died with this oncoming vehicle. So what happened is the bandit car stopped short of the Alpha car and had room to escape. And they followed this little, it moved and then we moved, and there was this little sort of little ballet fucking thing where eventually the Charlie car rams him up the arse and rams him into the back of the Alpha car, and the Bravo car comes alongside, and it's at that point that I shoot. So I'm like, I don't fucking remember any of that shit, But you're absolutely right, and the human brain is a strange thing. I mean, it's an amazing thing, but it doesn't record like a camera records. If you had your dash cam and you went from A to B. That camera is going to keep recording until the memory on the memory stick runs out, isn't it? But what it records in its very limited field of vision is going to be absolutely what happened within that field of vision. What's different with the human brain is we don't have a memory stick, and that memory stick's got to last us 60, 70 years if we're lucky. So what happens is it's constantly wiping what isn't important. So when you go to work and you go through that busy junction, and you get to work that time and you go, I don't fucking remember going through that junction. It's because the brain went, nothing happened, no need to remember it, bin it. And so, that's why, when you get to my age, you can't remember why you went back into the kitchen.
Well, you misremember things because
exactly.
The other thing when you're remembering something, you're not actually remembering the event that happened. You're remembering the last time you remembered it.
No,
so years go on, and it's Chinese. Your brain plays Chinese whispers on you,
and that's what it does. And so, it's particularly like you said, in a life-threatening situation, it'll remember this, it'll remember that, it'll remember the other, but it cuts out all the immaterial stuff. And when at the end of it, you sit down and you try and put it back together again, there's all sorts of little things. When I give lectures, I describe a situation where, I close my eyes, and you can do this now. You close your eyes and you think, what does your front door look like? And you go to that door every single day.
Yeah.
You can probably remember there's scratches on the lock and all the rest of it. But when you go back home today, have a look at your door. I guarantee it's not the door you remember.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what I did. There was next to my door was a wooden door. And I described it. It had a circular glass pane in it, which I described as being multicoloured. Yeah. Because I sort of pictured almost like a church stained glass window. It had wooden strips down the middle, and it had bolts like black painted bolts. So it had that sort of antique looking door. And next to the door, there was a Spanish pair of tiles with my house number on it. Let's say it's 6-3. Yeah.
Spanish tile. What are Spanish tiles?
Well, my perception of Spanish tile is that it's black writing on a white background, but it's probably got like blue and orange sort of flowers and stuff.
Yeah.
It's quite typical, blue and orange.
Mine's kind of like that.
Yeah. So I said, and then I went back and I looked at my door, and my door was totally different. It wasn't stained glass at all. It was just plain foggy, sort of frosted glass, but there was no colour in it. And the bolts that I remember were actually the bolts on the inside of the door that secured the inside of the letterbox. And the Spanish numbers were just black and white.
Oh,
there was no colour in it at all. But your brain goes, it's Spanish.
Yeah.
And so the other bit of your brain goes, oh, they've normally got blue and orange, haven't they? So, it's your own door. You go through it every single day, but your recollection of it probably isn't accurate because it doesn't need to be accurate. It's like an impressionist painting.
Yeah.
If you had an impressionist painting of, I don't know, the Mall looking towards Buckingham Palace, you can close your eyes and you can picture it. But what you won't have is the exact amount of number of windows and where they are. But it'll be like I said, it'll be like an impressionist painting. And so, and like I said, it'll just reinvent stuff and rejiggle it and get it in the wrong order. And we all do it all the time.
Question for you. Seeing as you know of Gaz, Horizon Scan, the one parallel I said the other thing with, when I said you were coming on, he said, make sure you ask him about my machete opinion. Okay. And his machete opinion is the way to stem this knife crime machete problem we've got in London and other places at the moment is quite simply shoot on sight. So someone's wielding a machete.
Yeah.
Whether they're 10 yards away from you, or whether they're 2 yards away from you, maliciously, if they look a certain way, hoodie up, they look like they are aggressively intending to use that machete, or could do.
Just kill them.
And there's no other reason to be carrying that machete. Let's say you're on Oxford Street, right? They're not in the jungle, yeah? They are in an urban area. His opinion is, give the instruction, shoot on sight, it will nip it in the bud pretty quickly.
Well, obviously, as a police officer, as a former police officer, as much as I'd like to shoot every twat that's running around with a black balaclava and a machete, obviously that isn't going to create. But I'll give you why that kind of works. That his theory, right?
I don't deny it would work.
When I shot the three guys at Woolwich, it was actually in what had been a meat packing factory. In fact, it had been an abattoir, and so it became known as the abattoir shooting. It was known locally as the abattoir, although it wasn't actually a working abattoir at the time. All the way through my police career up to that point, so from 1975 right the way up until 1987, Thursdays and Fridays was robbery days. Robberies were predominantly carried out by white villains from South Rotherhithe, Deptford, West Ham. It almost seemed like people had stopped working in the docks and decided, let's go do an armed robbery, and they were like professional teams. We had people that would plan a robbery like a military operation. They'd have 10 getaway cars laid around. So whichever way part
heat
of the compass.
Heat style.
That was exactly what they were like. Not quite as good because it wasn't Hollywood, but they weren't far off. Yeah. I wouldn't put these three in with that, but they were close. They were embryonic, like pucker armed robbers. That was their ambition, to be like one of the big teams, and they started off on banks in the 70s. Then they made banks too difficult to do. So then they did security vans, and then they made security vans too difficult to do. So they then took to just what we called slaughtering vans, which is instead of trying to rob them and get the money off of the van in situ, they would just take the whole van.
Mm-hmm.
On one occasion, they did one in the Old Kent Road, where before the security van was due to arrive at the place they were going to ambush it, they took over a quick fit Euro on the Old Kent Road. So they went in. It was like early in the morning. Quick fit Euro's open. They haven't got any customers yet. They get all the staff. They tie them up. They pull the shutters down, put a big close sign on it. And then when they did the van, they drove the van straight in, shutters go up, van goes in, shutters down, and they're in there with all the power tools. To cut through.
Jesus.
I mean, and then they, like I said, they would have getaway cars at every point of the compass plus. So whatever way they were chased by police, if it went wrong, they'd be able to change getaway cars, and very professional teams. When we shot those 3 blokes in Woolwich, it virtually put a stop to armed robbery.
Really?
They just went, you know what? Fuckers are shooting back. So up to that point, it had been flying squad detectives who were like big rugby playing bruisers, many of them, with cauliflower ears and broken noses, big 6-foot blokes with pickaxe hells and 2-inch revolvers. But if you're a detective and you've been following a robbery team, you watch, let's say you're fucking subject A, they watch subject A get up every morning and take his kid to primary school and kiss his kid goodbye, and then go and meet his girlfriend, and then go back to his wife, and then go and pick his kid up from school again. So there's a human sort of thing there. Plus, they're not shooters, they're detectives. They like going down the range and having a bit of a shoot, but they've got a 2-inch revolver. They're not operators, to use a corny expression. And we kind of were. And so when we started getting used by the flying squad, we had no relationship with this guy. He wasn't a human being to us. He was just a bad guy with a balaclava. And so we were far more likely to shoot and far more confident in our rules of engagement and far more comfortable handling firearms than they were. And so if they twitched, if we shouted armed police and they started to turn, there's a good chance that they weren't going to get away from it. And one of the robbers, these really crap books that you get at the airport, W.H. Smith, there'll be the true crime thing, wouldn't it? Like, I was the hardest bloke in London, and I was the most wanted bloke, and I picked up one book just out of at the airport, and I was just flipping through it, and it got to this bit, and this guy goes, we were called PT-17 at the time, which stood for Personnel and Training 17, because we were instructors first and foremost. And it got to this bit, and he goes, yeah, I had a friendly inspector at Woolwich Police Station, and I knew about this new team of of Met Police assassins called PT-17, and he pulled me and he goes, if we catch you doing a bit of work, Bob, you're going to end up in a coffin. And so I thought, I ain't doing that anymore. And it was all bollocks. We had no such remit. We had no shoot to kill policy. It's just, but we killed 3 of them, and it almost finished armed robberies dead.
So, coming back to the machetes and coming back to lethal weapons when you blatantly shouldn't have one, there's no need to have one. I find it hard to argue against.
Well, obviously, the law states that you have to be in fear of your life or grievous bodily harm, or for someone else, either that happened to someone else.
Yeah.
So if we divert that a little bit and go a little bit more practical in real terms, I think what should actually happen, and is that if you get caught with a gun, we're throwing the key away. If you get caught with a knife, properly now, not just give you 10 years and let you out in 4.5. If you get caught with a knife, you're going to prison, and you ain't coming out until the end of your sentence. Because right now it means nothing. I remember there was one, I think it might have been during lockdown. It was
the problem is catching them, no, Tone. The problem is catching them. They cover their faces up. they cover everything up about them, because they are. Yeah, but they are camera savvy.
I get what you're saying, but there's plenty of footage of coppers doing stops and searches and finding a kid with a knife and standing there, and a crowd of angry people going, "Leave him alone, he hasn't done anything." And you go, "What's this then?" And you produce a thing. Now, if they knew that if they got stopped and they had that on them, they wouldn't. So when I was a copper, we've had a conversation about how policing has changed, but I would probably do 6 or 7 stops in a day, and I'd see someone I knew. Like, oh, it's little Billy Toe Rag, I think he might be wanted for burglary, or I wonder what he's up to. And you stop, you can't got no right to stop me. What are you up to then, mate? Well, you can't search me, you can't do nothing. They go, well, actually, your protest is making me feel that you might have something on you shouldn't have. Let turn your pockets out.
You can't do that anymore, though, can you?
Well, you
can. Just cause, right?
It hasn't changed that much. You have to have reasonable grounds to suspect that somebody's in possession of something. But the point I'm making is that you never got machetes carried in those days. They would carry a cheap kitchen knife, because if they saw a copper walking towards them, they go, "Oh fuck." and it would go over the garden fence. They aren't going to spend
So
30
what's
odd quid
changed
on a
then?
machete.
So what's changed?
What changed is we stopped stopping people, and we stopped stopping people because of political pressure. Now, it's political pressure. If you stopped people, and it's also nonsense. When I was on a special patrol group, like I said, it was pan London. We used to cover the whole of London, and actually, we very rarely patrol places like Brixton, or Peckham, or Lewisham, because even back then in the 80s, it was like, oh, we don't want to upset, the local community by, heavily police presence. So they'd make us patrol places like New Addington down in South London, or Bexley Heath. Well, we didn't go, oh, there's no black people to search. There's no black criminals to search. We just carried on searching white kids and nicking white kids for burglary and going equipped to steal and theft of cars and all the rest of it. But there's this perception, and it's this victim thing. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that, oh, it's only us that you're picking on. Open your eyes up. It's not. We're not there to arrest black criminals.
They don't. The problem is with that is that they don't truly believe it, right?
No, they
but
don't.
What they do is they leverage it. When I'm saying they, I mean communities or cultures, not just black. Asia in the UK is anyone but white, because they know they can leverage that as a tool to buy them time.
I think it's really important.
Or buy them time or buy them sympathy.
Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
I think it's really important to say that, I almost hate the word community now, it's used so often, but every community has its criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Vast majority of every community is law abiding, and they just want to go about their own, their day-to-day business. If a small percentage are criminals, and they get arrested, it's like, oh, give us a toss. They're criminals. But unfortunately, it's a matter of how vociferous you are. Every society, every community also has a silent majority. All right. And the silent majority are called that for a reason. Unless it actually affects them personally, they're not going to say anything. And the Afro-Caribbean community, I'm absolutely certain, just like every other community, the vast majority are law-abiding. They don't want anything. They don't want to be associated with Cabba or the likes of Cabba. Like I said, he's more of a danger to young black kids than he is to anyone else. But unfortunately, the way it is, if they speak up, all of a sudden they'll become an Uncle Tom. They'll become, someone that, and it was interesting to see after the Cabba, acquittal, on the internet, the amount of, decent black people saying, look, he's nothing to do with me, Cabba. I don't want, to be associated with him. And until lots of people start doing, until that silent majority stops being silent and speaks up, then, and that applies in all communities,
That's part of it, I think. But another part of it, I think, is if our political classes, our political elites, and our media start handling these things differently, then that'll change it as well. You look at the Cabba thing, and you look at the Manchester airport, that stamping incident. We shouldn't be having political people, ministers of parliament or anyone else in those positions of authority coming out and themselves jumping to conclusions based on what has been shouted about on social media or not. For example, insinuating that race has something to do with any police involved incident.
Well, we had Khan when the Chris Cabba shooting happened. We had Khan actually stand up and going, what we need is justice for Chris Cabba's family.
That's absolutely disgusting.
To me, it's like you're actually in charge of the Met Police. You are the police authority. What you should be doing is say, and you're in charge of London. So what you should be doing is saying, right, we need to, speaking out publicly and going, right, everybody needs to calm down at this point because we don't actually know what happened.
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
But they've all got
that kind of behaviour from people like him empowers and going forward empowers other people.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I get it from like a family perspective. You want to defend your son, daughter, cousin, brother, whoever has been arrested or in some cases killed. You want to defend them. You want them to think that they're innocent and completely, the best person in the world. I understand sometimes where you're just going to latch on to anything in order to try and preserve the innocence you perceive them in, right? I get that, but it's when it's used disingenuously and everyone jumps on the bandwagon.
I think we touched upon it, in quite a lot of detail earlier. I think what really needs to happen is there needs to be a means of filling that void with the correct information, or certainly more accurate information. Even if you say that we don't know the full picture yet, but what we do know is this, and this, and this, and there's no, and we'll let you know as soon as possible. The problem, like I said, is that our legal system is different to the United States, where the chief of police can stand up and show the body-worn camera. I don't know quite why. It's not my expertise, and there'll be people that tell you, "Oh, you can't do that," because there could be a court case, and you might be compromising the court case, and blah 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 blah. They need to look at a way around that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of your of what you said about historical laws that need changing. I can't see any issue with releasing body cam footage, because that body cam footage, it can only be interpreted one way. It's literally, it's there, it's visual, it's not going to change between that point and the point of a trial, for example. Different to that is if someone gives a statement, you release a statement, that statement could change between the end of the trial. It could be interpreted in different ways and based on memory and things
so
like
what
that.
They do now, as I understand it, is you're required to give an official account of what took place, an initial statement, as soon after the incident as practicable. So what happens is we have a thing called post-incident procedure, and I'm not going to get this absolutely right because it has changed, but as I understand it, certainly when I was involved in my case, before I could leave my operational base and go and get my head down after what turned out to about a 16-hour shift where I've shot and killed someone, you go back and you have to write your statement, and it can literally be, on day, date, time, place, I was on duty when, as a result of the behaviour of a young man in the rear of a vehicle, I believed, as a result of intelligence, that he was in possession of a fully automatic weapon, and his body language led me to believe he was about to fire on my colleagues, so I opened fire with a number of rounds. Yeah, boom. That's it. You've accounted for you. Then what would happen is you would be allowed to go home, and 48 hours later, after your body's calmed down, the adrenaline's out of the system, you've had a chance to think about it, because what they're saying is if you try writing that statement, as we talked about earlier, too soon, it's going to be, after 48 hours, you then sit down and you write a full statement, and you are allowed to talk to your colleagues to a certain extent, just to make sure you get the time right and the vehicle index number, but it's your recollection of the events that you put down in your statement. As I understand it now, you do your initial statement, which allows you to go home and everything. When you come back 48 hours later, I believe you are now allowed to watch your own body-worn video camera before you write your full statement.
That's good.
So what you can do is, in my statement dated such and such, I stated that I did this. I've now looked at my body-worn video camera and I realised that wasn't correct. In fact, I did this. It's like, if you're clearing a building, and you're concentrating your effort on the crack, waiting for the door to open, and someone presents a flashbang to you and you nod and the door opens and the flashbang goes in, and you then enter and you end up engaging the suspect. You're probably not going to know who it was that posted the grenade.
No, yeah.
Yeah, because he's over your shoulder. You're not going to turn around, take your attention off the door.
You can make an assumption.
Yeah, if you're all wearing gas masks, you're probably not going to know the guy that was in front of you opening the door because you're concentrating on the door. So when you're writing your statement, and it's fair to say that the room I shot the bloke, it was my number 2 on that. That was me. Was it? Oh fuck me! I thought that was Hugh. No, mate, I was opening the door for you. So that's considered all right. It's when you it's collusion where you're covering for each other and everything else. So when they do those statements, they're done under the supervision of a lawyer who's present, and basically guides the process to make sure that, the statement covers everything that needs to be said, but you actually write it independently at the relevant pieces.
The body, we're going to finish up in a minute, but the body-worn cameras are a godsend.
As I understand it, the amount of complaints against police have dramatically gone down. Because when someone says, "Oh, he was rude to me," or "he did this," or "he did that," or "they did the other one," you look at the bodywork.
Yeah.
All right, I'll withdraw that. I'll withdraw that complaint.
Godsend.
The other thing I've noticed it's done is it's made street policing, for the most part, more professional. Because if you know you've got your own
Yeah.
body-worn camera on, and in point of fact, if you know that actually there's CCTV in the street, which there never used to be in the 70s when I was a young copper, or that everyone else's thing, you watch your P's and Q's. So actually, I think, you know, as uncomfortable as it may be, it has made day-to-day policing more professional. It's also, you know, tied their hands to a large extent. You know, I mean, I don't know how. Hats off to young coppers that put up with some of the shit that they have to face.
Yeah,
there's deliberate baiting going on, isn't there?
Yeah.
These people that go out specifically to draw, you know, into a confrontation.
Again, I think that's one of the areas where maybe the powers that police have and the law needs to be reassessed. You know,
what's your numbers, officer? They're on my sleeve there, mate. Oh yeah, I'm dyslexic. Oh, dyslexic. It was just as well they're fucking numbers then, isn't it? You can write it down yourself. It's just, you know, it's just having to kowtow to idiots like that.
Yeah.
You know, hats off. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Your book, where is it available? What's it called?
It's called Lethal Force.
I thought you'd forgotten then.
I almost had Lethal Force by Tony Long. Yeah. It's actually quite fun. I'm going to tell this story now. I shouldn't really tell this, but Bravo 20, the one that got away, Chris Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell the story. Chris will probably kill me for this. But
I've had Chris on here.
I vaguely knew Chris through. He was on B Squadron, and we used to do joint training exercises. And he remembers an incident where him and me were sitting down at a table with some other lads from B Squadron that I knew, and we were having a bit of a chat. But he was the newbie on the squadron, and so I was really chatting to the other lads, but he was there. Anyway, when I got the publication deal to write the book, they said, "George, do you know anyone famous that can write your book?" And I don't know, you know. And someone said, "Oh, how about Chris Ryan? Because he's a mate of there was a guy called Steve Pearl that wrote under another name, and he'd written a couple of books about the unit, and he actually had moved out to Florida. I think he became a US citizen." And he lived in Florida, and he knew Chris Ryan because both their books came out around about the same time. So I rang my mate Steve up, and I went, "Steve, do you reckon?" It's obviously not his real name, but do you think Chris would write a?
His real name is public, by the way. His real name is public.
Oh yeah,
yeah, but we'll stick to Chris.
I know it is, yeah. But you know, it was like, well, do you think he'd write something? So anyway, he said, "Yeah, I'll speak to him." So he said, "Yeah," he said, "Just give him a ring." So I gave him a ring, gave him the number, I gave him a ring. And we're chatting away, and I said, "Mate, what I'll do," he agreed to it. He said, "Yeah, absolutely. No problem, mate. You know, I'll do it." You know, so I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, mate. I've done like the first few chapters. I'll send you them over, and you can have a look at it, and then just write whatever you think." He goes, "Oh, fuck that." He goes, "He said, just fucking rate it yourself." He said, "I just saying it off." So the whole of the forward, I'm giving the game away now. The whole forward by Chris Ryan was written by me. Glowing, mate. I bigged myself up massively. But he did read it, and he went, "Well, fair enough."
I don't know if you should tell that story.
It's a forward. Nobody reads the forward anyway, do they?
But I wonder how many that happens all the time. I bet that happens all the time. It has to, or they just copy and paste. You think the amount of books Damien Lewis's forward?
Oh, he's the guy that's written a couple of.
He's written a bunch of books, yeah, but his forward is in most military, a lot of military books.
Yeah,
you just copy and change a few words. And anyway, is there anything you want to cover that we haven't covered?
No. I managed to remember the name of my own book, which is
well done.
Which is
if I was right, you're going to pick up a couple of copies. Larvae again, if you could sign them for me.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And I will. I'll do a giveaway for the patrons. And it's been a good chat, mate.
Good.
Enjoyed it. Yeah, I think I got what I wanted. It's a good insight into the realities of policing and firearms policing, you know, and it's excellent as well because you've got your own lived experience from the 80s, 90s, noughties, and then you've got the knowledge and experience that you have now because you're still very much integrated with the world, with that world now. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Good luck with everything.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, nice one.